The Gaza War is one of the most consequential conflicts of the 21st century, not only because of the scale of death and destruction inside Gaza and Israel, but because it has reshaped politics across the Middle East and beyond. It began as a shock attack by Hamas-led Palestinian militants on southern Israel on October 7, 2023, and quickly became a massive Israeli military campaign in Gaza. Since then, the war has expanded into a humanitarian disaster, a legal battle over genocide allegations, a hostage crisis, and a regional confrontation involving Iran, Hezbollah, the United States, and armed groups across the region. To understand it, we have to look at three layers at once: the immediate trigger, the long-running Israeli-Palestinian conflict behind it, and the consequences of the war itself. The immediate trigger came on October 7, when Hamas and other Palestinian militants crossed from Gaza into Israel, attacking communities, military sites, and a music festival. According to the source article, 1,195 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed, and 251 people were taken hostage. For Israel, it was the deadliest day in the country's history. The attacks caused national trauma, shattered assumptions about Israeli security, and created intense pressure on the government to respond. Hamas framed the assault in the context of occupation, blockade, and Palestinian suffering, but the killing of civilians and hostage-taking were widely condemned as war crimes. Some commentators and organizations have described the attacks as genocidal or as a genocidal massacre, while others focus on the crimes committed without using that legal label. Israel's response began with a major bombing campaign against Gaza, followed by a ground invasion on October 27, 2023, after Israeli forces said they had cleared militants from Israeli territory. The stated goals were to destroy Hamas as a military and governing force, recover hostages, and prevent another October 7. But Gaza is an extremely dense territory, with civilian neighborhoods, refugee camps, hospitals, schools, tunnels, and militant infrastructure all interwoven in a small strip of land. This made the campaign devastating for civilians. Israeli forces fought repeated operations across the territory, including battles around Khan Yunis, the Rafah offensive, the siege of North Gaza, and later a major offensive in Gaza City in 2025. Israel also targeted Hamas leaders inside and outside Gaza. The human cost in Gaza has been catastrophic. The source article states that more than 73,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed since the Israeli offensive began, and notes that studies published in The Lancet indicate this figure may be a significant undercount. Beyond the death toll, the destruction of Gaza's civilian life has been enormous. Around 90% of civilian infrastructure has reportedly been destroyed. Water, electricity, sanitation, medical care, and food distribution have been severely disrupted. Most hospitals, educational facilities, religious sites, and cultural landmarks have been damaged or destroyed. Large parts of Gaza have become uninhabitable, and nearly all of the Strip's roughly 2.3 million Palestinians have been forcibly displaced at some point during the war. One of the defining features of the war has been the blockade and the struggle over humanitarian aid. Israel tightened restrictions on Gaza after October 7, cutting off or severely limiting access to basic necessities. Israel has argued that restrictions and inspections are needed to prevent Hamas from diverting supplies or weapons. Humanitarian organizations, UN agencies, and many governments have argued that the limits on aid, combined with bombardment and displacement, created famine conditions. The source article describes a partial famine and the collapse of essential services. In practical terms, this meant families repeatedly moving with little shelter, hospitals operating without adequate fuel or supplies, and aid groups warning that hunger, disease, and exposure were killing people alongside. Bombs and gunfire. The war has also involved mass detention, allegations of torture, and attacks on civil society. The article states that Gazan journalists, health workers, aid workers, and other civil society members have been detained, tortured, and killed. Israel has also detained thousands of Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank since the start of the war. Israel says detentions are part of counter-terrorism operations and security screening. Human rights groups argue that many detainees have been held without due process and that abuse has occurred. The article also states that torture and sexual violence have been committed both by Palestinian militant groups and by Israeli forces. These allegations matter because international humanitarian law applies to all sides, including states and non-state armed groups. A major legal and moral question surrounding the war is whether Israel's actions in Gaza constitute genocide. Many scholarly sources and international organizations, including UN bodies, NGOs, and the International Association of Genocide Scholars, have concluded that Israel's actions meet the definition of genocide under international law. Several countries have acknowledged that genocide is occurring and supported proceedings at the International Court of Justice. In September 2025, the UN Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory concluded that 4 of the 5 acts defined by the Genocide Convention had been committed in Gaza since October 7, 2023. Israel and its supporters, including the United States, deny that genocide has occurred, arguing that Israel is fighting Hamas, not the Palestinian people. The genocide debate is not just about the number of people killed. Under international law, genocide requires specific intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That means courts examine military conduct, official statements, patterns of destruction, restrictions on life-sustaining necessities, and the broader context. The case against Israel at the International Court of Justice is still being reviewed, and legal findings can take years. At the same time, war crimes and crimes against humanity are separate legal categories. Experts and human rights organizations have accused both Israel and Hamas of committing war crimes. Even when sides dispute the word genocide, the documented civilian suffering, hostage-taking, torture allegations, and destruction remain central to accountability debates. The hostage issue has remained one of the most emotionally charged parts of the war. Hamas and allied groups took 251 hostages on October 7, including civilians and soldiers. Families of hostages became a major political force inside Israel, demanding both military pressure and negotiated releases. Ceasefires and hostage prisoner exchanges became intertwined. Israel sought the return of captives, while Hamas sought a halt to the assault and the release of Palestinian prisoners. A 2023 ceasefire broke down. A second ceasefire in January 2025 ended after a surprise Israeli attack in March, according to the source article. A third ceasefire took effect on October 10, after Israel and Hamas agreed to phase 1 of a US-backed peace plan. Inside Israel, the war produced its own displacement and political crisis. More than 100,000 Israelis were internally displaced at the height of the conflict, especially from communities near Gaza and from northern areas affected by Hezbollah fire. The trauma of October 7, the fate of hostages, and criticism of the government's security failures created deep domestic pressure. At the same time, Israel's military campaign received extensive support from the United States, including military aid and diplomatic backing. Washington has defended Israel's right to self-defense while at times urging greater humanitarian access and ceasefire arrangements. This dual role made the United States central to both the continuation of Israel's war effort and attempts to negotiate pauses or peace frameworks. The war did not stay contained to Gaza and Israel. Armed groups aligned with Iran and often described as the axis of resistance clashed with Israel and the United States across the region. Hezbollah and Israel traded strikes for a year, contributing to wars in Lebanon in 2024 and 2026. Israeli operations in Syria continued and, according to the article, contributed to the fall of the Assad regime. The conflict also connected to wider confrontations involving Iran, including the 12-day war in 2025 and the 2026 Iran war. These regional escalations show how Gaza became a focal point for larger rivalries: Israel versus Iran, U.S. power versus regional militias, and competing visions for the Middle East's political order. By 2026, the war had become a symbol far beyond the battlefield. Around the world, mass protests demanded a ceasefire, Palestinian rights, hostage releases, or stronger support for Israel, depending on the political context. The conflict also fueled a surge in anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian racism, showing how violence in the region reverberated through societies elsewhere. Under the US-backed peace plan, Hamas announced the resignation of its civil administration on July 6, 2026, but the deeper questions remained unresolved: who governs Gaza, who rebuilds it, how hostages and prisoners are addressed, how security is guaranteed, and whether Palestinians and Israelis can move beyond cycles of massacre, occupation, siege, and retaliation. The Gaza war is not only a military event, it is a test of law, humanity, and political imagination. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.